Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another installment of the Can We Please Talk podcast. As always, I'm Mike Leon.
I'm Nick Severi.
We've got an interesting show for you guys and gals tonight. Nick, you ever wonder what it's like to play college basketball at Duke University?
Every single day of my life.
And what about what it's like to work for the President of the United States?
I can't even dream that big. That would be amazing.
Well, tonight's guest has combined both worlds, and that is none other than Reggie Love. He was a former Obama aide in the Obama administration from 2007 to 11. He even worked on the campaign for Senator Obama at the time. And Reggie was a two-sport athlete at Duke University, where he played football and college basketball for Coach K, won a national title in 2000 and 2001, was the team captain in the 04-05 season. And then he recently released a book after his journey through the sports world and politics, and it's called Power Forward, My Presidential Education. I've got a copy of the book here. And it's a fascinating tale about, not only playing for Coach K, but learning from Coach K and then transitioning that into the 44th President of the United States, and seeing and being with him every step of the way along his journey from Senator to President-elect to President of the United States. So it's a super fascinating story that he has, and we're excited to have him on. We reached out to him and he gladly jumped on.
Yeah, it's going to be an exciting conversation. Mike, you started off with a couple of those two questions about these different universes about college basketball and working for then Senator, then now former President Obama, and someone who's been able to live in both worlds gets a chance to share some fascinating insights about the overlap of that. One thing I'm especially interested in is just the idea of leadership, being around two renowned leaders in both Coach K and President Obama. That experience of being alongside those two men, what are those experiences about being, just the difference in leadership styles, actually. At the same time, just some fun facts that we know about him. His interest in photography, which is something that I learned in seeing a recent interview from him, not so recent, about 5 years ago at Harvard University.
Right.
And just the different life experiences before joining the campaign and then after being out of the White House. Just an awesome figure, and we're very lucky to have him tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of echo that, there's so much glimpses of different things that he touches on in the book, and some he kind of leaves open for interpretation, some he kind of closes the loophole. But he gives stories about, everybody remembers back in 2008 that everyone thought Hillary Clinton would be the nominee, and just how far behind Senator Obama at the time was in all of these Democratic races. It was the little engine that could. A lot of people didn't think that a two-year senator from the state of Illinois would eventually become the Democratic nominee. So he's got a tale to tell of all of the stops along the campaign, how much hard work they put into getting that campaign the way it ended up matriculating, which was to the presidency of the United States. So it's a fascinating tale. And then he's got some Duke stories. I learned something new about him in the book. He went through a mini scandal at Duke that kind of changed him. And Coach K really harped on him that, hey, when you put on this Duke jersey, you're really representing the entire university, not just yourself. And so he's got so many similar tales like that. And we're just excited to have him on, and can't wait to touch on all these topics with him. All right, joining us now is a former two-sport athlete at Duke University. He played college basketball under Coach K and won a national championship with the Blue Devils. He was also the captain in 04 and 05. And after a brief stint with a couple NFL teams, he decided to venture into the world of politics, where he worked as a campaign staffer for then Senator Barack Obama, who became the President of the United States. And he joins us now. He wrote a book about his experiences called Power Forward, My Presidential Education. That's Reggie Love. Reggie, Mike Leon, Nick Severi, thanks for jumping on and giving us a couple minutes.
No, Mike and Nick, thanks for having me on, and I appreciate the kind introduction. My best friends from college are from Voorhees, so it's always good to to connect with folks who know Rutgers well.
Yeah. And it's funny that you mentioned Rutgers. Obviously, Nick and I went there. And I wanted to get into a little bit of your background for people that don't know you. Tell us a little bit about your background, your childhood. I know you grew up in North Carolina and how you got into sports and eventually at Duke.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the journey I took was probably a little bit different than a lot of my peers and friends that I grew up with. My mom worked in corporate America for a little bit. She worked at Philip Morris before she started her own hair salon, and my dad worked for Social Security. And so, we had a very solid, like, middle class Southern city life. And around the 8th grade, my mom thought that I needed a little more structure to get through the educational system. And so somehow found a small independent school on the other side of town called Providence Day. And, they gave me a little bit of financial aid, and I went there and, ultimately kind of put me like on a different path for college prep. In terms of sports, man, I grew up playing sports my whole life. I probably started basketball when I was about 4th or 5th grade. My closest friends outside of politics, most of them are guys I played with, either rec league in elementary school or AAU basketball. And I probably was like the best man at like a couple of weddings for guys that like we won like state championships with in North Carolina, and we're like 13. And sports for me has really sort of been the thing that has been the bridge maker. You could cross any chasm with sports. It never mattered where your parents went to college or what your dad did or what size house you grew up in. The only thing that really mattered was like how you played the game and how you competed. And so, and then sometimes, even though we say that America is a capitalistic society and it's a meritocracy, I often believe that, only in sports do you truly have a merit-based approach to, how you compete and the relationships that you build.
When you think about sports and as it relates to your own personal development and eventually your own professional development, between Duke, moving on into politics, what was the role of sports for you as both growing up and just as it formed you as an adult?
The embarrassing thing, and I really hate to admit it, is that, sports was really more of the carrot that kind of kept me motivated for school to perform. And I probably, I think that I didn't get as much out of college as I probably should have, because, in my mind, I was like, I just wanted to do well enough for my parents not to be pissed and to graduate. But when you really think about what the proposition is, right? Sports for education, I definitely should have gotten more. And so, and because I wasn't a payer, I didn't have a true appreciation for, what those classes cost. And I never really got it until I went to grad school. And, you finally, you pay a tuition check or tuition bill, then you're kind of like, oh, wait, this, and so for me, education, I was fortunate to, my parents like stressed it. I was like the kid who went to like summer reading camp in the summer versus like 2 weeks of basketball camp, right? My parents were just very much the believers that, sports can be taken away from you at any point in time, but no one can ever take an education away from you. And so I have to credit my mom, my father for really not only, articulating those things to me, but also holding me accountable to those same principles. And so, I'm lucky to have had those principles instilled, and to be totally honest, I went to a school like Providence Day, and I was fortunately like college ready when I got to Duke. And, oftentimes you hear the story about kids who, come from educational systems where they're the top of their class or really high in their class, but they somehow haven't gotten the same skills or the same tools that they need in order to be ready to succeed day one when they get to college. And so, I kind of stumbled into that a bit, but it definitely played a role in how I saw the world. And I remember the first summer that I did not stay for summer school. And summer school is really a mechanism in college where you could take a couple classes, and then that way you didn't have to have as heavy of a load during the athletic season. And but it was really kind of frowned upon. And that summer was like probably the most important summer for me because it really did two things for me. One, what you don't take into consideration is if you're in summer school every summer, what you never do? You never have an internship. And if you never have an internship, you never have any experience. And if you never have any experience, no one ever wants to hire you. And I think that is like one of the things that I was glad that I did looking back. I went out and I interned on a campaign in the state of Indiana for a guy who was running for Secretary of State. And what it really showed me was that, Indiana, which was, a little bit more of a red state than North Carolina, it kind of showed me that we as people and as Americans, we all kind of want the same thing, that even though we may look different or sound different or time zones may be different, at our core, the things that drive us, the things that motivate us, the things that give us respect and dignity, they're all kind of the same. And that was, an eye-opening moment for me. And because it then kind of explained to me that, everyone's like relatively reachable if you want to reach them.
Reggie, I want to harp on that later on because I know you mentioned that in the book with your relationship with Obama, and you realize that coming to light of like everyone kind of wants the same things. But on the sports side for a second, and I know you had a couple stints in Green Bay and Dallas and their training camps, and you mentioned that to Obama in the book, and he said, I can't imagine how grueling that was. When was the moment for you that you realized I'm not going to make it at sports? Was it in that Cowboy training camp, or at least not make it to the level that you wanted to make it to? You obviously made it on the college level.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that's a great question. I would say that when I got to Green Bay, that was the first time that, I kind of like looked across the room and basically was like, you know what? It's not clear that I'm better than anyone here. Not that I'm significantly worse than, but I was like, all these people are pretty freaking good, Right. And when I left, when I got cut from Green Bay, I didn't, I look back at the people that they kept, and I didn't have a, that guy, how sometimes when things don't turn out your way, you're just like, man. And so I didn't have that feeling then. And so I kind of felt like, yeah, this is going to be competitive, and whether or not I make it, it's probably a coin toss. I probably need a little bit of luck. Not only will you have to be really good, you'll have to, you'll probably need someone to get injured or someone to, and so when I was waiting after I got released to see if someone else picked me up, Coach K, his assistant at the time was Johnny Dawkins, had seen on the sort of the ticker that I'd gotten released. And so he called me the next day or 3 days later, kind of saying, hey, do you want to come back and play a fifth year of basketball? And for me, like, they weren't paying me in theory to play. They paid some of my housing, and they paid for me to finish up my second degree in political science. I'm sorry, in public policy. But for me, I never felt like the end all be all for me playing basketball was that I needed to make money from it. Like, and I played Duke basketball, and I never kind of had that pressure of, if I don't become a pro, that this wasn't worth it for me. And then when I got to Dallas, that after that season, Parcells called me after that season and said, hey, why don't you come down here and play defense? We're looking for someone that can guard Antonio Gates. You know, we think you'd be great at it. And I learned a lot. I put on a bunch of weight. And, you know, when I got down there, I thought that I had a pretty good shot. And they kind of said, look, we want you to get a few more reps. We want you to go to NFL Europe, and want you to come back and do it. And I had, I sort of did the math. You know, I had gotten like my first like check, you know, like my first like NFL check. And, you know, it was like $10,000 or $8,000. It was like a lot of money for whatever age I was at the time. Right. But I had taken this accounting course that CJ Skinder taught, and he writes about this with Adam Grant, and he writes about this in his book Give and Take. And I sort of realized that I was making like really great money for my age, but I could chase this dream forever, and I probably would eventually get there, is what I thought in my mind. But by the time I got there, my body would like not be worth much. I'd have very little transferable skills. And at that point in time, you know, I was just coming out of school and still kind of competitive in the marketplace for sort of non-sports, for like non-athletic related jobs. And, you know, there were like classmates of mine who were making $175,000 at, you know, 22, 23, 24 years old. They were going to do it for 40 years. And for me, the math was like pretty simple. It was like, I can make $500,000 for 5 years or $200,000 for 50 years.
Right.
And so I think the difference for me was that I think that some people play the game of football because they love it. And I will say that I did learn to love the game of football. But, you know, I played the game of football because of, you know, just the sort of statistical significance that football plays in the world of scholarships, right? There are 80 scholarships at a university for football. There's only like 10 for hoops. And so, you know, when you want to go get a top-notch education, and you know those universities at that point in time cost $40,000, and you know it seems a little unattainable, right? Like if you don't play sports.
Your journey is fascinating because we go from here, and then you mentioned that getting into politics and being a part of a campaign. Something I always like to ask any guest on the show, you know, in these varied fields is, as a person who's been on the inside, what's a misconception everyone, like Mike and myself, anyone on the outside that hears a story like yours, what do people totally get wrong about working on a campaign and being a part of a journey like that, working for Senator Obama and then on route to the White House?
I mean, well, look, I'd say, you know, Barack Obama now, it's like promised land, becoming, 30 million books sold, president of the United States. I think a lot of people, you know, believed it to be, you know, a lot more sexy than what it actually is. And I kind of say that, you know, working on a campaign for a guy who's a first term, 2-year United States junior senator from Illinois, It's not, he's no Beatle, he's no Michael Jordan. And so it is a little bit of a grind. And now I would say that I loved every minute of it, even the parts that were grind, because, working on a campaign really kind of gave me this feeling of what it felt like to play on a team. Now a little bit harder because, during the normal season, you've got a game every week or even a couple games a week, and you have a chance to go out and compete and to, look at the tape and see how you did, and to get that gratification of like getting a win. A campaign almost feels like an Olympic athlete who's like training for, his or her one event that they, are going to have to compete on a certain day. And, it's a culmination of all that training and all that work, like all at once. And I think that is like, I think that nothing creates the amount of like anxiety and adrenaline around that moment, right? Where you campaign or work for 2 years for something to know whether or not like you did it right. It's just such a, there's so much at stake, and, you not only put your time and your resources in personally, you put the resource of your friends and your family, the resource of strangers. You've probably neglected like a lot of your own like personal and family responsibility because you've been on the road. So there's really, it's like nothing I've ever experienced. Because even with like a basketball season or with college, you got an off season, you got downtime, you have like this time to recharge and regroup and to reevaluate or reload. Where in the world of campaigns, like everything is like building on top of one another. It's like, can you raise this first $1 million? Can you get a good chief of staff? You've got all these little barriers you got to hit. And even when you hit those barriers, it doesn't actually mean that you've won or will win. It just means that you haven't lost.
Reggie, I wanted to ask you something about the campaign because you touch upon it in the book, where Uma Abedin, Senator Clinton's aide, was asking you to get Barack because Senator Clinton during the primaries wanted to apologize to him. And there was a little bit of a confrontation between the two of them. And Barack kind of said to you later on that that's the day he knew he was going to win, just because of how under control he was and how she wasn't. First, how was that exchange for you? Just, like you mentioned, you were so green and working on the campaign, and then you see the two primary candidates probably for the Democratic nominee, almost, arguing with each other. But then the second part of it is, was Barack right? Did that cost Senator Clinton, eventually Secretary of State Clinton, in 2016? Was there any moments that you looked back and saw that and said, maybe that kind of cost Hillary and Barack was right about that?
I mean, look, I think the point that he was making in 2007 when he made that comment when we were on the tarmac at DCA, I think it showed him that even though the narrative was such that, oh, she's a Clinton, she's invincible, they've got resources, they've got money, they've got a political machine, that it showed that there was like a chink, like a little chip in the armor, that not only did he recognize it, but she recognized it. And then in terms of like 2016, look, I don't think there's anything correlated between 2008 and the 2016 campaign. I think when you look at 2016, I think there really, there are three things that were that really turned that election the way that it went. I think one of them is related to her and this whole thing around like trust and the email and the Bengat and like all the stuff, right? Like, you know, I think when we get to be a certain age, I believe this, or when we have put so much of ourselves into public service, into trying to like, you know, do the right thing, you know, like very similar to Joe Biden. And Joe Biden did this a little bit too, where, you know, you did the best you could do with the information you had at the time. But looking back on it, you know what, like, you should have used the military to desegregate fucking schools. Like, and like, you were a great public servant, but like, you can't defend the things that you got wrong. Like, even if it didn't feel wrong at the time, like the idea that you somehow can't say, look, you know what, I screwed up and I'll never, and I will say Joe Biden did he did actually admit that it was the wrong thing, but like, it took Hillary almost a year to apologize, to say, you know what, I was wrong about this thing in which she really did nothing, you know, like she was wrong about it. She shouldn't have been on a personal server, but she didn't like break a law. Now, I'd say the other piece that happened in 2016 that, you know, I think Democrats, especially, you know, the liberal elites, you know, we say, oh, well, the stock market's back and like the job numbers are great. The economy's great. You know, my 401k is doing great. But I think, you know, I think people just missed this strain on the American household financially as a function of the tightening of consumer credit. And it, you know, look, and I don't know, I can't say Nick and Mike what you guys do, but like, if you've never known anyone who basically had no cash and had a maxed out credit card and basically was just trying to figure out how to get a couple bucks to then make a really hard choice between trying to like pay down a credit card bill or a cell phone bill or a heat bill or buy groceries. If you've never met someone like that, then like it's hard to really to know that like if people go from spending almost 130% of their annual income to like 110 or 115% of their annual income, like you say it's credit, but some people will just say, oh, well, that was my money. Like I put my hand in my pocket and that was the money that came out, that was access to capital that I had and needed and was a critical thing in order to make ends meet. And I think when you don't address that issue, when you don't address the fact that even though our economy had come back, even though unemployment was higher than it had been in history, and you don't address the fact that wages are flat, that credit is tightening, that people feel like they don't have access to the American dream because they see on Instagram and Twitter all the things that people have that they don't. You know, now you could say, look to China, look to Africa, look to India, and you'd say that I'd rather be, you know, living at the poverty line in America than living at the poverty line in India. I think that's a rational thing to say, but I don't think that's what people actually say or believe or do. You know, I think people then believe that, you know, this system doesn't work for me and hasn't been working for me. And you know what, like I want to go in a different direction, or I don't even believe in it enough to even participate in the process.
Yeah, it's funny because you're speaking to an election and the policy thing comes to my mind. And I speak to you now as a graduate from Wharton. From an economic standpoint, I mean, you're speaking to metrics that oftentimes we use to really misjudge economic health. You're back in the White House. I see you're nodding your head like putting that hat back on. I appreciate that. You're back in the White House from an economic policy standpoint. What do the first 100 days look like? What should they look like for the Democrats?
Well, it will be very different if Ossoff and Warnock do not win on January 5th. But look, assuming that we don't get both seats and it's, the Dems are off by one seat in the Senate, look, I think, look, I don't work for the CDC. I'm not a doctor. It just seems like this virus thing is like, it's not subsiding, and it actually seems like it's growing. California just went into parts of California just went into a lockdown. Other parts of the states are going into lockdown. Like, I don't know how long these things last, but I just imagine that, you're not going to get a large stimulus passed before Joe Biden's sworn in January. So, like, I assume you're going to have either a very large stimulus or a stimulus like, number three, and I think that will be a much needed thing. And I think that stimulus will also have to sort of take into consideration, like, the creation, the distribution and transportation, the marketing, and all those things that go into the vaccine, and making sure that, not only here in the U.S., but globally, that, enough people are taking the vaccine that, we can sort of curb this thing in a way that is meaningful, that allow us to have confidence in living our lives the way we used to live pre COVID-19. And then I think, there'll be a couple of opportunities. I think it'll either be some sort of, call it an anti-lynching bill or police reform. And then I think you'd probably try to get a voting rights, John Lewis, the 21st Century Voting Rights Act passed. I think one or two of those things will probably be big priorities. And then I think it's really a coin toss, right? I think, I think Biden's been, very communicative on climate change and how we look at our role, the U.S.'s role in climate change. I think that I think climate change is real. I think the U.S. needs to lead, but I also think it's like a hard topic to get people fired up about, because ultimately, it's a consumption tax in order to have clean energy, and I don't. And people love to use debt and leverage and expect other people to pay for these things in the future if they can afford having to pay for it today. Even though I think fundamentally it's the right thing to do, I struggle that it's something that we'll be able to get done, knowing that, that 2022, you could have a chance to win back the Senate. And then try to do something meaningful with less pushback. And then I think, I think he's said he'll roll back the Trump tax cuts, and then I think he'll also do some stuff on on the estate tax, and I think that'll be painful for some people. It won't be painful for me. I don't know about you guys, but like,
I'm with you. I'm not feeling that pain.
Me neither.
we good.
Yeah. But, Reggie, I wanted to ask you something, because you touched upon it earlier, with respect to that we all really want the same things in essence, whether left, right, red, or blue. You talk about it in the book, that the relationship between you and Obama, even though he was obviously older than you, that's where you kind of learned that, like, from the campaign, that meeting all these people of races and ethnicities, that we really want the same thing. I'm curious, you feel that same way after the last 4 years, after the last 4 to 5 years, and now that you've been removed from politics for a while, you haven't really been on the campaign trail, you haven't really been, in that Oval Office setting, and seeing what's happened in America now, do you still feel that same way?
Look, I think that's a good question, right? I'd say that tribalism is more alive and real now than it's probably been in many, many years. But, I think that, I think a lot of the things that we see today are just, I think they are symptoms of the fact that we have not solved for a lot of the root causes. And I think those pain root causes are the same still. I think people want to have opportunity. They want to have the ability to work and earn a living wage, and also be able to take a vacation and have a weekend and have health care and retire with dignity. I'd say that, and I think people want to have hope. I think people want to believe that anything's possible for them. And, and I think when you look back at the last couple of months with all of this visual violence that has been going against Black Americans by law enforcement, by law officers, not all of them, but some of them across the country, right? I can't imagine how people can believe in a system where a white man can shoot a black man in Georgia and walk around on the street for 30 days and never even set foot inside a police station. I don't know how people can believe in a system like that, where they think that if I play by the rules and if I do the right things, then, ultimately I'll be okay. And I may make it to the next level, right? That in itself, shakes people to their core. And that's in the Black community, right? I mean, I often think that people are mistaken that, issues that are specific to urban, populated areas that have, that are majorly represented by African Americans or people of color, those things that they face, those issues around access to education and access to jobs and healthcare. I mean, those are the same things that people in Youngstown, Ohio are dealing with. Mental health, abuse, addiction, economic depression. I mean, it's the same. They're the same symptoms. I mean, the same root causes. They just, when people get sick and tired of them, the symptoms bubble up, and they bubble up in different ways. And what people then believe in to solve those problems is really a function of, the communities and what those communities believe and what they're being told by leadership and who's to blame for these things, right? I would always laugh about this because, when people would have this xenophobia about immigration, folks coming from Mexico and they're taking all the jobs, and and I would say that, look, I think, I think that those jobs are being done, and sometimes those folks are illegal, sometimes they're not illegal, but what it does do is it keeps working wages low. It keeps the price of goods low, and we all love our cheap goods, because we go to the store, we want our basket to be full. And half the time, those jobs don't pay enough for folks to even be incentivized enough to want to do them, right? And so should you be able to work on a farm 2/3 of the year and be able to earn a living wage? I think, you should, but that does not come without a significant impact on how we consume our own goods and how we pay for our services. And so, however you want to flip it, like there will be pain someplace, and the pain can be things are too expensive because you know what, we pay a lot to employ people to do these things, or we can say, you know what, like our labor market is a little bit smaller for not that the labor market's smaller. You can say that certain jobs, because of wages, end up not being as attractive for some of our lower class Americans, and maybe that shouldn't be the case. Maybe wages, maybe there should be a universal living wage, right? But like, I would imagine that someone's going to be pissed off, and it just depends on how people are going to be pissed off. They can be pissed off down, or they can be pissed off up. And I think history has shown us it's easier to get people to be pissed off downwards onto a lower class than it is get them to be pissed off at the class above them.
I mean, your experiences politically in the sports world and just a human being living in these wild times, do you find yourself jaded, hopeful, a mix of both? Where do you sit with where you are today?
I mean, look, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful because I two things. I had parents who were who prayed for me, but they also taught me, and they also made me like learn the history and not only learn the history because they wanted to be smart, learn the history because they wanted me to have perspective. And like, if you truly know the history of this country, black or white, there's no way you can not be hopeful. Like, the only thing you can say is be hopeful. And I know that the narrative has been in some places that things in America have not changed. This is the same America that was in the 1960s. And I would say that some of those sentiments and some of the motivations of people are still the same, but the country as a whole is not the same. The opportunity that is provided to so many more people that were underrepresented or minorities, that's like brown, black, yellow, woman, like it's just we're light years ahead of where we were. When you look at other countries of our size, population-wise and geographically speaking, no other place has done anything close to the scope of what we've been able to do. And I think we just have to remember that these things don't happen overnight. Very similar to a campaign, like, sometimes these things last 2 years, 3 years. And I think Martin Luther King's quote is like it's the best quote, is that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And it doesn't bend by itself. We have to work to continue to bend the arc. And if we don't, if you're not willing to be hopeful, if you're not willing to work and fight to have a better community and stronger principles, and you don't want to hold your elected officials accountable and responsible, then like, you shouldn't be hopeful, and like, but you also shouldn't complain, because you essentially have the country that you will be given the country that other people have fought for themselves, and not what you fought for.
Reggie, this has been great. Before we let you go, which one is harder, a Coach K practice or planning an event at the White House?
Well, is it a midweek practice after a game, or is it a preseason?
No, Carolina's on deck, and
yeah, I mean, the Coach K practice could be pretty tough. But we never had any practice crashers like we did at the White House for the Indian State dinner, and that was brutal.
Yeah, that's a good part that you touched on in the book. And actually, my wife, a big Real Housewives fan, alerted me to that. I was like, I didn't remember that. But either way, Reggie, man, it's been a thrill having you on. For those of you in my audience out there, go get the book, Power Forward, My Presidential Education. Reggie really talks about learning from not only President Barack Obama, but also Coach K and the lessons learned from his parents as well. Former two-star, I'm going to say two-star athlete at Duke University. We really appreciate you coming on today, Reg.
Oh, well, I appreciate you, Mike and Nick, for having me, and good luck with the show. And I hope you guys have a great holiday season.
All right, so that was Reggie Love. Like I mentioned, go get his book, Power Forward, My Presidential Education. It's a great read. And he really, like I mentioned, he talks about just learning from, Coach K, President Obama. There was so much we really wanted to get to with him, but really appreciate him jumping on. Nick, what'd you think of Reggie overall?
I think it really got summed up in the last question, talking about where is he today, and I love the quote he brings back about the arc of history, and I think it's something that you and I both have heard before. I think just landing in a hopeful place, just is exciting to hear his journey and bring us to today, where he sits with these varied life experiences. Just an amazing conversation, and I just sit in gratitude to be a part of that dialogue and the stuff we're doing as a show, and just the insights he gave about being from just at practicing at Duke as a basketball player to working alongside as President Obama's personal aide, to being a student at Wharton at a tough business school, to being an intern and just the economic challenges of that, to being in the NFL. I mean, Mike, I thought we took this conversation in a variety of different places, and at every point of it, Reggie was just very upfront, and I thought at the end did a great job of connecting the dots as to what brings him here today and where these experiences lead him.
Yeah, it's such a well-rounded individual. You can hear it in his voice. Education was preached in his house, but then just where sports took him. Training camp with the Green Bay Packers, training camp with the Cowboys, and then all of a sudden he's working on the campaign trail. And he even mentioned that he even worked for a previous senator that was running for election in Indiana. So super interesting to talk to him today. Go get that book. It's really a good read, and it's a very quick read too. Next week, we're going to have a very interesting show for everybody. We're going to get into the art of filmmaking, and Emmy award-winning director Jason Ayer, who directed ESPN's The Last Dance, the story of the 97-98 Bulls. He's also done a bunch of other documentaries, Andre the Giant, which is on HBO Max, and it's about the former professional wrestler's life. And he did the ESPN 30 for 30, the Fab Five, about the five Michigan basketball freshmen that really revolutionized the game. So we're excited to talk to him next week, just getting more of his background. Him and I worked together at HBO for years, and HBO was really a big ground for a lot of documentaries. Him, Ezra Edelman, who did the OJ Made in America documentary. Gabe Spitzer came out of there, who did the 30 for 30 on John Daly. So there's a lot to talk about with him, but we'll get into the art of filmmaking and directing with him next week. That'll do it for us. Another installment of the Can We Please Talk podcast. As always, I'm Mike Leon.
I am Nick Saveri.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. Give us a subscribe or follow on the show. Leave us a comment in whatever app store or however you use your podcast. Thanks for listening.
Folks, Apple, Spotify, YouTube.
That's
Get
right.
on it.
Stitcher, Google, we're on all of them. We'll see everybody next week.